Hello and welcome again to the One Shot Show, where GMs go to level up, and you can level up in just 15 minutes with us because we give out way too much experience for our encounters. My name's Matt.
My name is Mock.
And what are we talking about today?
We're talking about GMing style.
We've already, if you're listening to episode 3 because you've listened to episodes 1 and 2, then you'll have heard us, I think, already talking around this topic a few times.
A lot of style, and we don't know what it is. Matt, what does GMing style even mean?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, big question, funnily enough. That's why we're dedicating an entire episode to it. In a nutshell, it means how your games feel to the players. It's vibes, right? In the way that...
And that is the One Shot Show. Thank you very much for listening.
It's how quick it is. That sounded weird. We can edit that out. So when you pick up a book, let's say you pick up a book by Patrick Rothfuss, right? I love Patrick Rothfuss's style. You can read that, and then you can pick up a book by... I was going to say Mark Wahlberg. That's not his name. Who am I thinking of? Mike... I'm drawing a blank. Let's just say... George R. R. Martin. That's not even...
This just in. George R. R. Martin and Mark Wahlberg. Are they the same man?
So, let's say you pick up a book by Patrick Rothfuss, and let's say you pick up a book by George R. R. Martin. They are going to feel very different. There is a different style, right?
One is very heavy.
Yeah, well, size-wise, yeah. And if you ask an author where their style comes from, where their voice comes from, because they all talk about it as this important thing, this sort of ineffable... thing that exists within the words of the text that you just sort of naturally develop over time. That's true of, I would say, any creative medium, right? Like, everyone starts out in art school learning the same fundamentals. By the end of it, you know, you've got a Yayoi Kusama and you've got a Pablo Picasso, and they have two totally different styles of art that they're making.
For those of us who are illiterate Luddites, like myself, this does also apply to the movies and video games that you love. It is the instant vibes that you get.
Yeah, and you can feel it, all right? It is
Skyrim versus Cyberpunk.
And okay, I'm going to give a real fun example, a real layman example. You know why Michael Bay's movies feel the way they do? It's because he cut his teeth doing commercials. And when you are shooting and editing commercials, you have to get the most out of the least. Right? You're on, some of the smaller budgets you're going to work with, and you got to totally maximize it. And he was well known as being able to get heaps. Like, it felt like huge production value out of quite a limited budget. So then when he got to play with big Hollywood budgets, he was like, great, I'll ramp up the maximalism. I'm not just going to make it look the way my commercials look now that I've got a budget that supports that. I'm going to go even bigger. So it's the biggest explosions. It's way more cuts. It's faster paced. If he can fit 5 shots into the same space that another director's fitting 2, he goes, huge success. That's Michael Bay's style.
The multi-millionaire director of Bad Boys 2 and the Transformers series aside, how did you find your style, and how long did it take you?
I would say I found it halfway through the first campaign I ran.
How long was that campaign?
That campaign ran for, I want to say, 2 years, about that.
So it took you like a year of constant games before you finally settled into a rhythm. You decided what you knew you liked.
Yeah. I've gone through some of my old, I used to hand write out my quest lines and the way the plot threads. I had literal box flowcharts.
Matt, everybody listening to this podcast has done that.
Well, exactly, right? And then once I kind of formalized that structure in my mind, once I didn't feel like I need it down on paper, I could sort of move away from that. Often I think about, developing something like style. Style is one of the most abstracted skills you can build in any creative medium. You start with the fundamentals. I talked about art school before. You start with still life drawing or whatever. I've never been to art school. I don't know what they actually do there. Weed, I suppose.
Surprisingly little still life drawing, quite a lot of weed, yes.
Yeah, a lot more weed than still life, yeah. If you smoke enough, everything does go still. This is no longer a PG-13 show.
Is there...
We're going to get that thing on Spotify that says drug references.
Great, I'm looking forward to it. I've never had drug references before. What I would like to know is, are there games that you have played in where there are styles that you've liked and styles that you haven't liked?
See, that's a funny one. There's a game that I played in that had a style that I liked that I think actually had nothing to do with the GM. It was sort of the style of the medium. It was a Power Rangers one shot. So yeah, and if you've ever watched Power Rangers, it had that real it was a little bit tacky. It was a little it was really fun, bit camp, and we just played into it, right? Like to the point I sat down and I saw the GM had misprinted on my character sheet my languages. He only wrote Japanese. He forgot to put English on mine. So the other ones had English and this and this, and then I just had Japanese and that was it. And that just became this running thing where I would say, would be where should we look for clues? And I'd be like, my character says, the wind blows slow over the tall mountain in fluent Japanese. And one of the other guys would be like, you're right, Blue, we should check the library. And it just became this running thing, right? Because you could feel it immediately buy into the style. That was so much fun, that level of campiness. I've never touched that in my campaigns. I don't want to. That's not the kind of game I run. That's not the style that I'm interested in.
So a point you're making there is that a style can require buy-in from your entire table.
Exactly. I run quite a deadly game. For the games that I tend to run.
And there are lots of players who really don't like that will get really attached to their characters. I can talk about this a little bit because I run a lot of games for kids. I love running games for teenagers. They basically don't know the rules. They do whatever the hell they want. It's delightful.
They're so unbound by the same...
By logic. By common sense. My God.
Teenagers are not bound by common sense. Groundbreaking take on the one-shot show.
But there are tables that I'll have where these players their number one priority is finding the cutest pets they can in this deadly fantasy world, adopting those pets. And then keeping those pets safe. They don't want any combat. They don't want anybody to be in danger. They are simply there to explore, use their imaginations, and socialize with each other. And I've played in campaigns where it is nothing but deadly combat after deadly combat after deadly combat.
Yeah.
And these styles, the GM is bringing something already. You are bringing your own flavor, your own style, your own preferences. But without knowing what your players want, without having that buy-in, that is never going to fly. And this leads into a question I've got for you.
Yep, go.
Who are you running your games for? Is it for you or is it for your players?
I've got a real fun answer to this, and that is that it has to be both, and I have learned that the hard way. I've attempted to run games where I'm mostly just delivering what the players are interested in, and it can burn you out pretty quickly if you aren't also interested in it, even though most of the table is having a great time, and it's very easy to run an RPG and go, everyone's having a great time, I'm doing a good job, that's great, without ever actually looking at how you feel about it and whether you're enjoying yourself.
That is super, super important because the game master in any game is also a player.
Exactly.
And if you're not having fun, you will burn out. And speaking as a professional GM, that's a real common cause of burnout.
The converse of that is I have made the mistake of running a game where I loved the story I was telling. I had this really interesting, real high-stakes story. I often say that when you're running games, the players are telling one story, the GM is telling another. They're telling the sort of moment-to-moment what's going on, with a common narrative. You're telling this big, grand stake story of, dying worlds and, dark gods being summoned and kingdoms collapsing and all these incredible forces at play. And I had this really great story, but it was all up there, and my players did not care.
This leads into a really, really important piece of GM advice for any game. Is that your players will never be as invested in your world as they are in their own characters. Yep. And the GM is a player, and your character is your world.
I believe there's a half dozen whole episodes we could do talking about how to work around that, actually, how to work within that disconnect between the player and the GM and where your interests lie. Because I am a big believer that one of the great things in a long-running campaign, and I run long campaigns, I run, level 1 to 20, this takes us 2 years to complete kind of campaigns. One of the skills that I think I've developed over my years of running games is being able to weave this big narrative in, weave the player stories into that, the player's character stories into that, and over time get them totally engrossed and totally invested in that big story. And now we're all doing the same thing. Now we're all in the same boat. And to me, the art of it in the early stages of that, I'm delivering more for them. I'm hinting at these bigger things at play. And slowly they kind of weave in more and more and more. So if we're talking about style, I think that's one of my big hallmarks. And I would say that that is something that has come to me from a lot of the fantasy media that I grew up reading, right? A lot of it starts with the humble farm boy. And by the end of it, they're like, toppling a kingdom and restoring the ancient dynasty of dragons that used to rule the land, right? They just get swept up into bigger stakes. In a book, that usually happens within the first 100 pages. In a D&D campaign, it might take the first entire quarter of your story.
You're describing a lot of cooperation and buy-in from your players, all of you really working together. And I'd like to know, how do you pitch that at the beginning of your game? How do you describe your style to those players?
Funny enough, these days I don't have to because I'm generally running for the same crop of friends.
Do you find that your friends also have a very common shared media experience? Like you've all read the same things, watched the same things?
Somewhat. To be perfectly honest, when I'm looking for new players, player attrition happens. People move. People change jobs. People don't have the time to commit. What have you? When I'm looking for new players, honestly, more than anything else, I'm looking for personality fit with the table because actually that's what's going to get them through the first 10 sessions when they're getting up to speed. If they don't like the people they're playing with, they're going to struggle to get invested in any further. So I don't even bother telling them I tend to run this type of game. At most, I might mention, hey, it might ring a little bit old school. I run a slightly more deadly game, just so they don't show up with a really complicated, detailed character that dies 4 sessions in. That doesn't happen to me a whole lot, but I'd hate for that to happen to a new player. That's a guaranteed way to lose one. I actually want to wind us back to something that I was talking about a bit earlier. That I think is a bit fundamental to this whole topic, and that is that style, like I said earlier, is one of the most abstracted skills that you're going to learn. I talked about, manual flowcharts, right? Like first you're going to learn how to structure your sessions. You're going to learn how to structure, wider storylines. You're going to learn how to structure all of these critical things. You're going to learn how to design satisfying combats.
Which is going to be its whole own episode.
Absolutely.
All of those things.
Every single one of those fundamental things. And then once you feel really comfortable with all of those things, you're going to arrive at this idea of style, which is a bit more esoteric. And actually, by the time you get there, you're probably already going to have built 60 to 70% of your style of running games, because it's going to be a function of a few practical things. Like I find it way easier to design satisfying combats than I do satisfying puzzles, so I don't run a lot of puzzles. It's going to be things like my players responded really well when it felt like their choices mattered, so I'm going to introduce more of that in what I play. And by the time you're at that level of, now I'm looking at my style, you're already going to have a bit of a fleshed out bedrock to be working from when you're really starting to actively look at it going, okay, I actually really like these kinds of movies that work like this. I don't know. I love watching the MCU because the team-ups are so satisfying. I want all of my campaigns to feel like the team-up movie. Maybe you're trying to actively do that now on top of the bed of what you've already got.
So, to sum up, your answer to be, what does GMing style even mean and how do you find it, would be you absolutely cannot get it from a 10-minute podcast. No. You will need to spend 6 months to a year actually running games with a group of players who are cooperating with you before you find it.
Yeah, exactly that. So look, we've got a beat here. We've got a bit of time. So I want to throw this now back to you. Describe your style. See, it's a hard question, right? But we've had a bit of this conversation several times in the past now. We had a mutual player remark, I think we mentioned it in a previous episode, that your games are like Terry Pratchett, my games are like Brandon Sanderson, which is a really neat little, there's a bit more complexity to what's actually going on under the hood with what we do, but it's really easy to put it in words like that. It's actually much harder. If I sit down in front of someone and I go, my games are like Brandon Sanderson's books, they're going to go, yeah, right. They're going to be like, okay, guy, whatever, you've got a high opinion of yourself. But when it was somebody comparing the difference that they'd noticed at the tables, it made total sense. It absolutely clicked. So
your style is always going to come from things that you really enjoy. And things that I really enjoy are puns, social commentary, and political metaphor.
Yes. I think that's the only one we have in common is political metaphor. I'm all here for a bit of that. In fact, and again, this should probably be its own episode, but I truly think one of the coolest things about RPGs as a medium is that you can use them to explore topics that you're not otherwise going to be exploring. And you in the same way that a lot of media does exactly that. You know, often media, it might not have a direct one-to-one allegory, but there might be this other little thread of commentary on something that feels a bit real, kind of carrying on throughout the whole thing.
Things you care about are going to come through in the stories you tell. And if you tell as many stories as we do over however many thousands of hours we have sat around a table listening to our own voices.
Our own voices in various different accents.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I guess the natural evolution of that is starting a podcast.
yeah. Are you out of stories yet, do you think?
Hopefully not. I could do this until I die.
You will. They talk about the forever GM and they mean it. It is a sentence forever. But yeah, I think this is truly one of the most fascinating things with GMing, and I think it seldom gets talked about. It's something that we all kind of intuitively know once you've been running for a while, but it's really hard, I think, to describe it and explain it to someone who's a bit newer to it or only partway along that journey of building up those abstracted skills layer by layer.
Okay.
Because it's right at that top end.
So to summarize, it is almost impossible to define. You won't know what your own style is until you spend months and months running lots of games.
Yep.
And in order to successfully pull it off, you will need cooperation and buy-in from every player at your table.
Yep. And I think 15 minutes is enough time to cover off all that.
Yep.
I hope that helps. That's been the One Shot Show. This has been an absolute blast to talk about. Thank you very much for listening, as always, and we'll see you in the next one. If you like what you just heard, feel free to support us on Patreon. Every little bit helps. Go to patreon.com/oneshotshow.